So thanks everybody for your patience today, and welcome to this installment of the Smart Pandemic Pivots hosted by Idaho Smart Growth. Today's talk is going to be about science and public policy and the role for smart growth. We have certainly seen a great volume and pace of news lately, and it's almost overwhelming to see the amount of news about first the coronavirus pandemic, and then all the social unrest and protests that we've seen around the country, the political issues that are going on, and it's just like too much almost to comprehend and to address. But we also know that it's a multidimensional situation. We've had issues with the disproportionately affected populations who are poor, who are Black, brown, who are Indigenous, people who are elderly, who are adversely affected by climate change as well as this pandemic. And I think during the course of all of the things going on in the news lately, our tribalism, our hyper-partisanship, all the political divides have been laid bare. And so my intention today is not so much prescriptive as it is to cause us to all think a little bit more about what our roles might be in pivoting to our new normal. So today we're going to be talking about lessons learned, effective policymaking as being about more than just science, and the role that smart growth will have as a credible and trusted facilitator of the public process and the practical solutions that it offers. Given our tech challenges today, I doubt we're going to have much time for questions and answers, but certainly I'm happy to respond by any means that people may want to contact me. So what have we learned? We have learned that social distancing is really hard. And, you know, we think some things like broadband, when it functions, has been helpful in allowing people to stay connected by virtual means through Zoom meetings like this one, through telecommuting for the workplace. We know that community planning that has accommodated open spaces where people can gather and still have social distancing, and even the wider sidewalks that have allowed some restaurants to reopen with social distancing accommodated has allowed us to stay connected to each other. But I think effective policymakers have to be credible and compassionate, as well as aware of the science of the matter. And most policymakers, most elected officials are not scientists. Nonetheless, in situations like we're facing now, it's just vital that they are informed by science. So I think we have to start looking at the time frame. Nobody knows how long all of this is going to last. The economic recovery will be unpredictable, and business shutdowns are certainly painful. So what role might smart growth play in addressing that? This idea about everything being connected to everything else will take the 30,000 foot view of things and recognize that scientists estimate that some 75% of emerging infectious diseases like coronavirus are started in animal populations. A lot of that is related to the environment. So people who are disrupting wild habitat, whose human communities are encroaching on wildlands, the idea that we're losing biodiversity. And it's important to remember it's not just in the distant Amazon rainforest. It affects us here in Idaho as well. The biological scientists can talk about the way human, animal, and environmental health are interrelated, the One Health concept, but we also need the social scientists, the economists and the geographers, the political scientists who can address the human dimensions like like the poverty and the inequality, the conflict that we're experiencing now, and the human dynamics that really are related to the way our communities are designed and the way they serve or do not serve our needs. To have buy-in from the community for policymakers, it's really important that they get information from credible sources, that they, it's influenced by peers, by how directly affected we are by the issues going on, how immediate are the consequences. And so an organization like Idaho Smart Growth can be that credible resource to pull all those disparate interests together and to treat people in a respectful way, give everyone a platform to communicate their concerns, and then to have community-driven targeted objectives. This slide shows the number of Black people disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 hospitalizations, and it's significant, as you see the blue and the gold bars on that top left image, and then also on the lower right where you see the hospitalizations increasing with age. So health science has social, political, and economic implications as well. We know that industrial installations, fossil fuel refineries, and that sort of thing are disproportionately situated adjacent to Black communities, increase the risks for lung conditions like asthma. We know that low-income populations are at higher risk for obesity, for diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, all of which increase the risk for COVID-19 infections. And so it's about more than medical science. It involves health issues that are related to environmental justice that contribute to the social unrest that we're seeing now. So where people live, how their communities are configured, what resources are available to them are all within the bailiwick of smart growth. These are some pictures from a nurse colleague who lives in the Minneapolis area. And I think, I was talking about the social and racial injustice being compounded by poverty, by food deserts, the housing insecurity, the relative access to services like healthcare and childcare, access to living wage jobs. And it's just a reminder to us that those issues are not exclusive to Minneapolis. They occur here in Idaho too. We don't have the racial diversity that some other larger cities have around the country, but it's a wake-up call to all of us. And you'll notice in that lower image there, the volunteers came out in force to bring food to the neighborhood where the stores had been boarded up, and they had essentially created a new food desert there. So volunteerism is hugely important in these days. Climate change has been a slow-moving emergency, but I think its repercussions are increasingly urgent. Policymakers have had access to the scientific facts for years, and they've been slow and inadequate in their responses, I think in part because of competing interests and for economic reasons. But that's increasingly important that people don't forget about that underlying emergency situation in climate, which again disproportionately affects those high-risk groups who are Black, Brown, Indigenous, elderly, who live in places that don't have the broadband or other kinds of services to keep them connected community-wise. Back in November of 2019, I think it was, citizens were supportive of having a president declare a climate emergency. And as we see with other emergencies taking precedence, that COVID-19 took the front page. And then subsequent to that, the George Floyd murder took the front page. And so we're trying to deal with so many urgent things all at once, it can feel overwhelming. People like David Holmgren, who coined the concept of of permaculture, at least in the name of it. It's been a long time idea for waste reduction, for more efficient living within the support system of an ecosystem. The idea that we have renewable energy technology to reduce our impact on the environment, that's growing in popularity, and I think we find that there's more social equity as well as environmental justice when concepts like mitigation and adaptation efforts, as smart growth can do, take hold, and we become more sustainable in our community efforts. This slide demonstrates that medical scientists are some 10 times more trusted than our members of Congress. This was a 2018 Gallup poll, and I think that goes to the point about credibility of your sources. There's another slide here that talks about public trust in elected officials, and people don't really know what elected officials are saying when they speak. You can see on the slide on your left that scientists are significantly more trusted and that they have instill more confidence than do elected officials, and in that lower set of bar graphs. That said, though, when some political characters will shout some words that it's a scientific hoax, you know, people will listen. And I was interested to see some research that was done back in 2014 at Duke University by Troy Campbell and Aaron Kay. And they were suggesting that skepticism over scientific findings were motivated by aversion to the proposed solutions rather than the underlying problem per se. And so the local example I can share on that was several years ago when the city of Moscow was endeavoring to switch out traffic signals with LEDs to be more energy efficient. The assertion was that it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, lessen our impact on global climate change, and make the city of Moscow more sustainable. The city council at that time would have none of it. It was just, there was not any buy-in among those officials. But when that was reframed as, this is how much money we will save per intersection with these LED retrofits, they were all over it. So how we couch the solutions, how we shape what the arguments are is really important, and having convening broadly representative groups of stakeholders to have a platform for them to be heard and respectfully considered is really important. I think recognizing what the community's priorities and values are, as Smart Growth consistently does, identifying what the disagreements are and ways to find consensus or reasonable compromise in that is feather in the cap for the Smart Growth convening process. One example of a big win in that area is safe routes to school. And we find that people who are politically conservative still are very supportive of their children. And so the investment in safe routes to school projects is almost universally embraced. And I think that's because of the process that and the solutions that are proposed. This is a wordy slide, not give you just a minute to read it, but the gist of it is what the role of smart growth might be when we pivot to new priorities that are more efficient, more inclusive, more cost effective. And you can see that other countries around the world have implemented, instead of budgets based on gross domestic product, they're calling it quality of life measures. And this pandemic and the isolation we've experienced recently, and probably continue to for a while, has caused us to revisit our priorities and to see what those quality of life measures are that we could put in place here to help us weather this ongoing storm. Community resilience takes heart, mind, and agility. Effective leaders don't stop learning. And so I think the disruptions like we're experiencing now will lead to change, and now is the time for us to help shape the outcomes that we want to see. The health and environment and social justice are all interwoven, and those factors, addressing them all at one time can seem overwhelming, but not acting, I think, is not an option. So I'm looking to organizations like Smart Growth to help guide us through that process. I think a lot of people on this call, at least, are familiar with the principles of smart growth, but just as a refresher there, they appear, but not any single approach is going to be a be-all, end-all solution to the challenges that we're facing. But as we pivot from this disruption, we have to build on our strengths, our values, to mitigate the deficiencies, to emerge stronger. And systemic change is affected through place-based programs, projects, processes that bring people together, and to find commonality and to improve the efficiency and support the environment. So Smart Growth is a good resource to help us translate those disciplinary languages that don't always talk to each other so well. Here's an example of a Smart Growth project in Fall Creek Place, Indianapolis. It was a revitalization project that started back in 2001, and it garnered accolades from the National Smart Growth Organization, as well as the National League of Cities and the American Planning Association. So as in so many smart growth endeavors, this added increased density, it improved the walkability, it provided a variety of housing stock, mixed uses that can contribute to job creation and provide access to childcare, to groceries, to educational and job training opportunities, and improve the sense of place, the sense of pride and belonging in one's community, to be welcoming and supportive of everyone, which has been failing in our country in a lot of areas, and the reason behind so many of the protests that we're seeing on national television now. Moscow has some community planning goals that are very much aligned with these efforts. The idea about green space being close in is so important. Affordable housing, they're looking at accessory dwelling units and tiny houses, as in using less land mass and making it more affordable to everyone, to conserve energy use as well. And I think Idaho has a number of projects too, perhaps not on the same scale as Fall Creek Place. Nonetheless, it all counts. Elaine talked about public transit in her first Pandemic Pivots presentation. And I think smart growth is so important to help different modes of transportation evolve with this post-pandemic pivot. The advantages of public transit still hold even in these challenging times. It provides affordability. It connects people from places where they can afford to live to come into the core of town where their jobs might be. It's better for the environment, certainly, less greenhouse gas emissions, and it's better for health outcomes that can render us more vulnerable to some of these illnesses, such as the coronavirus that we're seeing now. So I think sanitation is going to be increasingly important for infection control. And so we'll see some pivots in place there. The other thing is promoting non-motorized transportation options. As you can see several pictures here featuring bicycles. You'll see Moscow's multimodal transit center there in the lower right. I took a couple of pictures of the bike shop in one of the bicycle shops in Moscow just to show how low their inventory is right now. And it's hard to find a bicycle now, especially one for under $500. Some of it is related to import markets, and some of it is just related to increased demand since the pandemic and the social isolation. Smart growth also, it has opportunities to help with career pivots. I think that the workforce is changing in major ways, that health science is connected to informing like social distancing and maybe limiting how workspaces are used. But we also know that advancements in technology are going to render some jobs obsolete. That innovation is going to create new job opportunities that maybe don't exist yet. And we're going to see a greater need for more flexible workspaces, for new uses for underutilized buildings. Maybe some of our retail spaces are going to become housing. Maybe we'll see some of those underutilized spaces provide opportunities for keeping our senior citizens safe. You know, we've seen so many serious outbreaks and deaths related to the COVID virus occurring in nursing homes. Maybe the way we house seniors and the services provided to them are changed according to the building's uses around them. We're going to probably see broadband expanded to some of our more rural areas and lower income areas to allow more telecommuting. And when people have really changed work schedules, they're probably going to be out there looking for gathering spaces where they can still social distance, but be in parks or sidewalk cafes or on bicycle trails around the community. And so development of those resources is going to be important as well. The mixed uses that Smart Growth advocates, live, work, recreate, shop, all of those things are going to be part of this pandemic pivot that Smart Growth can aid. So I think what we've learned is that this idea about pivoting is a still evolving effort. We don't know what the new normal is ultimately going to be, but we know we have to adjust. And like the safe routes to school image here in the walking school bus, even small steps help, and small successes can lead to larger ones. And Smart Growth, and especially our Idaho Smart Growth, are great resources, great partners in that endeavor. Thank you very much. And if there are any hangers-on in this call still, I'm very happy to field some questions.